Hello, 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 my Facebook family. We are here today to talk about my fourth installment regarding America's appetite for violence. Our first week, we talked about mass shootings and whether or not, what were the real reasons why we need you know, an MR-15 or automatic assault weapons. Then we talked about in our second week suicide and why would we murder ourselves? And it was a discussion again about violence in all kinds of forms. So that's self-harm, right? And then we talked about domestic violence and the idea in the domestic violence realm, why are men less likely to believe, and why do we ignore their pain as victims? And today we're talking about a very sensitive topic, which is something that I had hoped as a child, even that by the time that I became an adult, that this issue would be settled. But we're talking about abortion. Is abortion killing? Is abortion killing? Now, this conversation today is not about any desire to win an argument as to whether it should be legal or if it's immoral or ungodly. All those issues may come up in my description. That's not even the point of this discussion. I want to talk about what I felt was foundationally the question that causes the most conflict, which is this a killing? And if it is a killing, what or who is it killing? And if it's a human being, is it justified? And if it is a human being and the woman who's pregnant is a human being, whose rights or choice or I would say beinghood supersedes? Is this a biological question only? And so, like I said, this is not a debate as to whether it should be legal or not, or if it's immoral or not. But I wanted to talk about what the biology is behind it. So I need you to come, and I think I got my weeks mixed up. We went mass shooting, then the idea of domestic violence involving men, and then we talked about suicide last week. So we're talking about abortion this week as it relates to violence. So I need you to go ahead and click on your HOPE uppercase MORE Facebook channel or YouTube channel if you're watching on YouTube, and share it to your page. I think people are uncomfortable to join in the discussion, but maybe in having me talking to you and hopefully you're commenting below would help people understand at least what truth do we have to sort of deal with before we move on to what I would call the second and third questions. Well, should it be allowed? In what instances should it be allowed? What types of abortion could happen? And then is it, before all this other stuff is going on, we really need to deal with this. And I know for some people it seems very simple, but there is a big debate and it continues to be a debate. So please join the conversation, comment below. A lot of times people watch this on replay. So even if you're not watching live, it's okay. Comment below. I go back and look at your comments. Other people go back and look at your comments. And this is just my opportunity to connect with you, even if it's not directly as a guest. During this time of Hope Moore talking about violence and appetite for America violence, I have purposely come on here just me, without a guest, without a lot of other things like videos. I just wanted to have a discussion. I wanted to sort of just share my heart and get back to my Hope More audience since I took a hiatus for several months. But I'm looking forward to July and August where we'll be talking about a myriad of things. But my goal is to take some popular or pop culture topics and think of something that I haven't heard in a long time discussed, like what we had regarding domestic violence and male victims. Like, why is it so easy to ignore them? So please join the conversation. And let me just say, For those of you who are new to Hope More is a Christian countercultural talk show that we talk about issues of justice and family, but the goal is to spread the light. But we're not here preaching at you, and it's not Jesus, Jesus, Jesus in every conversation. But I just want you to know that you may think differently if you believe differently, which is okay. Still join the conversation. I feel like praying before I begin, so let me do that. Father, in Jesus' name, I thank you for the opportunity and the freedom in a country to be able to share views that may be popular, may even offend. But God, I pray whoever's watching this, that they become encouraged to seek for themselves, to ask you, to seek information so that they make wise decisions, Lord, that you did not call us to just to be, walking with the masses as sheep towards the world, but you called us to follow you, the great shepherd. And I just pray, God, that this very, very complex situation that has so many ebbs and flows, that you, God, would allow, Lord God, your people of God, especially the church, to stand on truth, whatever that truth may be and however that truth may lead, even if it's truth that doesn't appear to be something that anyone would want. But God, I just want to stand on truth. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. And I just wanted to pray that. And I also include in those prayers, if you have been personally touched by the issue of abortion, that understand that what we're talking about is not judging you in the sense of, when the word says judge not lest you be judged, that particular judgment is talking about the idea that you are created in a certain way and you're just that way and you're never going to change. It puts a box, like you're a thief, you always be a thief. That's why I'm very careful not to call people who have done certain things, label them that, because I think that is just judgment, and they could change, they could be remorseful, they can see things differently. So I'm gonna be very careful to try not to seem like I'm casting this one net over everybody. So let's get started. And in this particular discussion, I have tried to make some notes because I wanted to be very clear. So today we're talking about abortion. Is abortion killing? And I started with that premise because I felt it was very important for us to get to the foundation. Because if abortion was just, like removing a kidney from a body, or changing someone's eye color, or plastic surgery, we wouldn't be here talking. It's about the idea, or the conflict lies where a woman would find herself pregnant and does not want to have the baby through labor. And very, very interesting. I was looking at different definitions, and here we go. So, abortion is the termination of a pregnancy by removal or expulsion of an embryo or fetus. I know that that's more the pro-abortion, pro-choice definition. But more than anything, that is a definition that seems to come from the point of the carrier of the baby or the fetus or the embryo. It is that person's termination. Now, we're going to be talking about intentional abortion, but there are actually, a miscarriage is considered an abortion, but it is not, it's a natural removal of the baby from the womb. It ends the baby's life, but it's not done intentionally. So here we're talking about abortion. I am mostly focusing on the kind where the mother has intentionally decided to not have the baby. So now in the pro-life or anti-abortion leg, abortion is the taking of life of the unborn baby, coming from the perspective of the unborn. And so what, of course, this situation causes when we're asking about, is abortion killing? I wanted to just look at the idea of, is it a killing, and then talk and get to the point whether or not it should be justified. So, is abortion killing? is abortion killing? And so the question of is abortion killing, I felt was definitely something that we should explore, but explore it very carefully. And again, some of you are going to be like, of course, Hope, I know that, or it's not. But let's just look at this. So when I was looking at this, I was thinking, okay, killing. What's killing? It's to end the life of a living being. Now, what's unique about the child or the pregnant uterus or the embryo or fetus is that the ending of the life of a living being is inside of another living being. Is inside of another living being. But when we're dealing with killing to the end is to end the life of a living being, then I'm sort of asking, well, what is a living being that in this case, are we concerned about any type of abortion, like abortion of piglets or, some other abortion of a mammal? No, we're talking about a human being. So that living being would be a human being. And a human being is often described as a person. And I looked up some definitions, and a person can be described as a human being, especially in contrast with the animal, plant, or object. And in this case, we are finding ourselves as a person, a human being, separated from those classifications. I know some of my vegan friends say that they don't eat anything that has a mother. They don't eat anything that has a mother. So they stay away from meat and dairy and all this kind of stuff because it has a mother. So, but in this case, we're not talking about an animal mother. We're talking about a human being. So when I shared that abortion is described as termination of a pregnancy or a taking of a life, at the end of the day, to end the life through termination, I believe fits that is to end the life of a living being. Now, understand, I was very careful in not describing this as murder. It's not that I don't believe that murder is not involved, but I was very careful because what people often misunderstand, like even in the Ten Commandments, is that thou shalt not kill. That kill is actually defined as murder, meaning an unjustifiable taking of a life. We know that the God of the Ten Commandments allowed and sometimes called for war, which would be, in effect, men fighting and killing each other. So we know that it's not about not taking a life, but it'd be like unjustifiably taking a life. Do not murder. I was very careful to keep with the idea of, is this the ending of a life? And what kind of life is it? It's a living being. And what kind of living being is a human being. I think that the argument gets mixed up because people who want to see legislation and Roe v. Wade stay, they want to, for most of the part, they want to ignore the idea of who, if anyone, is a victim of abortion. And clearly, the child, the unborn, would be that life that's being terminated. So I also say arguably could be a victim. Now, we'll talk about some other victims in abortion historically as we share. But why is it important to discount or devalue that question is because if we have the unborn be human, then there's competing concepts, there's competing rights, if you will, there's competing desires that human woman pregnant, human unborn baby, both have, and who wins in that competition. Really, that is what the abortion struggle is primarily about. So like the civil rights, or excuse me, the Civil War, slavery was a primary issue for the Civil War, but there were also other issues attached to it, right? Like states' rights, right to property, jealousy between the industrial states versus the agricultural slave dependent states. So similar to that argument, when in slavery, the question after all that, right? Industrial North versus agriculturally slave dependent South, the right for property ownership, the right of states. When it came to the slave question, is this a human being? And if it is a human being, is it a person worthy of their having some type of rights or desire to live and be free? Is that subservient to the white slave owners' desire to own them? Right? I mean, it was a hard question for plantation owners to answer unless they say something like, well, they're not really human, they're like chattel, they're like animals, they're 3/5 human, they they need the subserviency, they had to be less than human. So in order for abortion to live free in a in the law, in the land, in people's minds, in people's justifications, I believe that many times you have to make that unborn embryo, fetus, whatever you want to call it, not human. It's a clump of cells, and this is why there are, and there has been different things that have happened in some states. It's I don't know if it's still required. I think it's a bygone situation often now. But before someone had an abortion, that they had to see they had to have, what is that called, you pregnant mothers, where they put like the little scan inside so you can see what's in your womb, you can see the unborn. You would have to see it. And that was, I feel, very important for the pregnant woman to be fully aware of all the consequences, not just what she can see, but also what's going on in her body. Also, some of the consequences that can happen, that could both be physically and mentally hurtful after the abortion. But the woman has a right to be fully aware. And see, when I was I still am, when I do criminal defense and someone pleads guilty and they give up the right to trial, they give up the right to cross-examine, to bring on witnesses, the right to appeal, they're giving these things up. Sometimes because of the emotion of the day, they just want to hurry up and plead guilty. They don't want to think about that. But actually, in order for it to not just be voluntarily, but informed, they have to know what they're giving up, because there may be consequences and repercussions that they never intended to give up. And I think that's why there often is a huge fight, that the abortion argument doesn't lend itself to look at the condition of the unborn at whatever weeks out, because it's easier to support abortion. It's easier for people to commit abortion. It's easier for partners and men to push abortion, or parents even to push abortions on younger people who get pregnant, when you don't think about the fact that that a human being is being killed. Here's some thoughts as that I think is really, really amazing, that supports the fact that I do believe that abortion is the taking of a life of an unborn baby or the unborn, for the most part. But this also sort of gets a little wobbly when we talk about abortion. But think about this. In Texas, they passed that 6-week abortion law, that you can't have one after 6 weeks. Modern technology can detect a baby's heart 18 days after conception, and about 4 days after most women miss a period and begin to suspect that they are pregnant. The heart can be seen to beat at day 22. Between conception and birth, the heart beats approximately 54 million times. So by 6 weeks, brain waves actually can be detected. And some studies show as early as 2 days from conception that there's signals from the brain could be detected. So the new heartbeat law in Texas, and that a lot of states are following suit, that prohibit abortion after 6 weeks. It is a concept that at this time this being, this unborn being is alive. There is a living being alive inside of the woman that has a heartbeat. Now, we know from, different situations, including maybe you've had a family member who has is maybe considered brain dead, but their heart is still beating. That there's argument about brain waves and heartbeats when it comes to deciding if something is living. So I think that's a real measured way of looking at it. Um, Other information I think is interesting is that there's independent movement, even if the woman doesn't feel it, for about 8 to 10 weeks. So now you have this heartbeat, you have brain waves and movement at 8 to 10 weeks. And some believe that the embryo starts spontaneously moving between 5 to 6 weeks. That there are studies that show by 8 weeks and 2 days that touching the embryo will elicit squinting, jaw movement, gasping motions, and toe pointing. So by 8 weeks and 2 days, the unborn is responding to being touched. And interesting enough, at 6 weeks, embryos can be seen, or fetuses or the unborn can be seen hiccuping. And that muscle is completely formed by 8 weeks, and intermittent breathing motions begin. So you start having organs and all these things. From what I read, that most organ systems are developed by an anatomical structure by 10 weeks. So there are even places that have a 10 weeks type of determination regarding abortion. Why? Because everyone is scrambling to determine when is life a human being, or a human being having life, or a human substance being living, a living, a living person. And so, for some people, life starts at conception. That's all it is. I mean, day 72 hours, 73 hours, you're pregnant, then that's what it is. And I understand the reason for it. I don't even have an argument against it, except to say that there are fair minds that disagree. Or at the very end says, listen, there are situations where delivering and laboring a child to the world is not either fair or justifiable. But can it happen? The ending of that, can that happen before the being has a heartbeat, at the very least? That what we're now dealing with is something that it does not have a heartbeat or brain waves, which for real is often how life is determined. If you're an adult and you don't have brain waves, if you don't have a heartbeat, you're considered not alive. So in this case, I don't know what the space is between not alive and undead, but there are those who are fair, who consider, you know what? Then life, that human being is not yet alive. Now, so is it fair that the laws are there states trying to change the laws to attest to that there's not killing of human beings that are alive, that are yet alive? There'll be people who argue that biologically that seems sound. That seems sound. Now, so if abortion is killing, and abortion is, and in this case, we're talking about intentional abortion, because what is it called? Spontaneous abortion, which is biologically because of like a miscarriage. That we're talking about the intentional taking of a life of a being, that human being being a person. Then the question may be, oh goodness, whether or not abortion, there's justifications. of abortion killing. And I'm using the word abortion killing or abortion violence because it does seem as the topic is abortion as an appetite of violence in America. That violence is defined as the use of physical force so as to injure, abuse, damage, or destroy. We know abortion is done to destroy the life in the womb. That's the point. That is the point. But the question may be, are there justifications? So just like I said earlier, that I didn't want to call things murder, both because it's polarizing and I think it ends the conversation too prematurely, is there justifications for abortion killing? Now, I think it's very important to know that definitions are powerful and not neutral. There's a reason why pro-lifers like the title pro-life and not anti-abortion. And there are people who don't like pro-abortion versus pro-choice because there are nuances in those definitions and they are powerful. And the power may be more so that to identify as pro-choice, you may be against abortions, but you find yourself supporting a woman's rights to it. Sort of like some people uh, don't subscribe or believe that same-sex marriage is good, godly, or should appear, but they may support someone's right to get married to someone and anyone they want to. So the pro-choice people often prefer that kind of description of pro-choice versus pro-abortion because they said that sort of sounds like they're going around trying to get people to have an abortion. And we know that that's not necessarily the case. But just like that, pro-life people appreciate the 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 use of pro-life, saying that they're for life of the child, and they're not just against the institution of abortion, they are pro-life. And so, definitions are powerful and not neutral. So I realize that even in talking about the situation, that there are plenty of people who have a counter argument, which is fine. They can have their own show and talk about it. But let's look at justifications of abortion killing, because we already determined in our discussion that this is a human being, a person, and this person is ended in the womb, and it is a killing. Okay, so justification of abortion killing, and I'm using that versus intentional abortion killing. Not, we'll talk about the exceptions later, but someone doesn't want a child, someone feels they're too young, someone is in poverty or feels like they cannot afford a child, it's a career interrupter. The particular person may not have any spouse or boyfriend or partner support in raising the child. These are the types of justifications people have for abortions, because at the end of the day, as the laws are for most states continuously since Roe v. Wade, is that you have a abortion on demand and you don't have to give a reason. Now, some people say that's simply privacy rights, right? You don't have to give a reason why you want to do for most things you don't want to do. I would just want to ask you, are any of those reasons you feel would be justification for killing if it was considered homicide or murder? Would that be justifiable that you're too young? If the life and the being had no choice in being created based on, and these are, we're not talking about some exceptions, we'll talk about that in a second, then it's not made, how do I say this? Taking the life of the unborn because the mother is young, the person is financially struggling, doesn't have family support, would be, in my opinion, the synonymous with someone who says that something is not worth living because it's a struggle, and that a person's life is not worth saving because it's a struggle. Um, and I find that difficult to subscribe to. And let's talk about the exceptions that are made in most states regarding abortion. In those states where even the biggest anti-abortion proponents live, they often are open to the concept of exceptions being made for abortion, for rape, incest, or the health of the mother or the life of the mother. I think the premise greatly is that if you did not willingly or legally engage in a sexual contact that led to a pregnancy, your choice, if you would, to even be pregnant was already hindered. And so you shouldn't have to live with that choice. My question is that justified? Well, let's look at this. If having a child will kill the mother, then there's things in the law, including self-defense or defense of yourself, that yes, it's still a killing of a life or a taking of a life or a termination of a life, but it's considered justified because it was in safety of that person. So I think the exception of the life of the mother is very needed. Um, but justification, um, especially after the child has a heartbeat and brainwaves and movement, and it's a living being. It's not just human now, it's a living human being, that my heart breaks. But is it to kill a child because of the way they were conceived? Is that justified? And to you, it may be. To you or to anyone else, it may be. But I do think that that question about is this a killing of a human being has to be considered when looking at what justifications we have for abortion killing. Interesting enough, only 1.5% of all abortions are based on rape and incest. And there's other statistics that are actually very, very, very interesting. I thought I, I, according to this particular study, it was saying nearly 6 in 10 women who have abortions are mothers, already mothers. They already have children. So I can imagine, whether it's economic or lack of support, or just, I don't want to mess up my body. There may be many reasons that women who already have children have decided um, to not have any more. I think this is very interesting. In New York, nearly 5,000 more Black lives are aborted than are born. There are more abortions in New York City right now, or New York, than are born. And why does that? They're Black babies. That hits me very interesting, because something that people don't talk about is a lot is that the founders of Planned Parenthood were what we call eugenicists. Is it eugenicists? They believed in the survival of the fittest, and they actually targeted brown and Black neighborhoods to reduce the numbers of minorities being born in America, because they felt that they were not the fittest to represent the race. So abortion, and the proponents of the earlier abortion, like the Planned Parenthood, which is provides majority of the abortions that happen in certain areas, they were meant to reduce our numbers. And quiet as it's kept, the reason why abortion has continued to come up as such a issue, not with everybody, because I know some people who have died on the sword of how abortion is not just sin, but is causing curses to America. And I don't disagree with that, actually. But there are a number of people who are more concerned about the lack of white babies being born due to abortion, which is why they are against it. Not the idea that Black or brown people also are being aborted, but that's them and their God. So I thought it was best said that here's the truth. Abortion does not end a pregnancy. Birth ends a pregnancy. Abortion kills a baby during pregnancy. And that's some hard truth. And I think whoever decides regarding abortion, they should be faced with the truth and they make a decision if they feel it's justified. And as a nation, when I hear arguments to let it the states decide as a Black woman, sometimes that makes me nervous because that states' rights idea supported slavery, supported Jim Crow, and it was the federal government that fought for protection. But when it comes to different mores, I do believe it should go to the states where possible, because if that is what the state of Texas and their constituents support, I think it should happen. And that's on a legal side. But again, it doesn't eradicate the question of, is it a killing? And there's so many other things attached to that. But I'm going to leave you with this. And I don't know. Here are my final thoughts about abortion, violence, or abortion killing. I should say abortion killing and be consistent. But is that one, women need to know the truth about life in the womb. I think that's true empowerment. I think it's like pleading guilty and not having a trial. That if your actions terminate a life in the womb, you need to know the truth about it. You need to understand this is what you're doing. And if you decide to do it, here's the possible consequences, both physically as well as mentally. That's true empowerment. So those who would fight for people to have sonograms before they're aborted, or even know what's done with the fetuses at times, which go into a whole nother thing about, there's a whole industry about aborted tissues and how they're used, aborted babies, they should know the truth. Okay. Number two, I think women in crisis pregnancy, and crisis is based on what the woman feels. For some reason, this pregnancy is problematic and unwanted. They need to have compassion, not prosecution. The biggest thing that I don't like about the Texas law, heartbeat 6 weeks law, is that it empowers people to basically inspire and police each other. I think that's wrong. I think they need compassion. They need love. If you're watching today, I don't judge you. I pray for you because I believe that it does impact you if you do not. And again, I'm a believer. If you don't seek forgiveness and reconciliation in your own heart, that even if it's not now, you will have some negative repercussions in your body as well as your spirit and mind. Number three, and this is a big one, I believe there needs to be more resources and support for women during and after pregnancy. Sometimes pro-lifers make a big deal of the unborn, but once they're born, want to just sit there and like say there should be no support. You know, we talk about welfare queens, all this kind of stuff. Come on now, crisis pregnancy centers, adoption agencies, different things that provide support for women after they're pregnant, or or when they have the children, if they haven't given them up for adoption, or just the idea of making adoption easier. These things, these sources and support can at least give women the true option of having support in this very difficult time, because I don't pretend to even imagine how it could be feeling the way many of them may feel. Number four, more families need to open their homes to adoptions and fostering children. I do know that I like the fact that adoption is really big in my family. We've had a lot of people adopt, often within the family. My brother was adopted, and his mother, his biological mother, was a teenager who well, I will talk much more about that, who was a teenager. And I'm just really grateful that she decided to give him up for adoption versus having an abortion. But I believe because we don't see the foster care system being as fruitful in placing children in homes versus having them be in big group homes and like, aging out and being sort of lost, that it is up to us to open our homes. I know twice I've started the process of being a foster parent, and I had to stop for different reasons, but I'm looking forward to adopting in the future, and supporting, and I do support agencies that help children have homes who may be unwanted. And we know foster care is not often people who are unwanted. It's like their parents weren't able, or for whatever reason, drug addiction, to provide for them. But there is need of adoption placement, and that they need more support, so that women who may not want the child they're pregnant with to take care of or can't, that they will be encouraged, that there'll be a family that will take them in and love them. Thankfully, babies are much easier to adopt. So, I mean, more wanted anyway. Number 5, my final thoughts, counseling for women who have had abortions, withholding judgment and disrespect. I've heard and just said people called Jezebel, murderer, women who've already had an abortion. It's in the past. They need a place focus forward. They need counseling, because some women ignore, and some people, including men who are supportive of or maybe force their girlfriend into terminating their pregnancy or killing their unborn, they feel guilt. And so, if, or they try to ignore the idea that it's a living being so they won't feel guilt. So even in coming into the knowledge, many times people need counseling and therapy, because now they're traumatized in a way, or they have been traumatized in a way that make it's so easy for them to either fight war to redefine their experience, or feel like they're not accepted, so they stay quiet about it. And I think we don't need to judge and disrespect these women. They need help and support, and we should give them. Number 6, and my final, which could have been my first, we really need to teach the truth about sex, the consequences of sex, spiritually, physically. People think that it's just so hard to get pregnant. It is not, especially if you're young. Contraception, even if you don't support sex outside of marriage, or maybe you believe that in no way should anyone stop the possibility of of conceiving, that I believe that if we're able to keep people from being in the situation of holding a living being, then they'll be less likely, right, to have need of ending the pregnancy or taking a life of the unborn. And chastity, I threw that in for good measure, because it seems like we've already given up on the idea that people can decide, until I'm married, until I get married, until I want to start having children, then I should abstain from sex. Especially young people who are no way in a relationship that's fortifiable with having even their education yet, or job stability, so that they don't find themselves in a situation where they feel pressure to end a pregnancy. Um, so those are some of my final thoughts about abortion and the question of killing, because I believe abortion is killing. So the idea of it's justified, the idea of if it should happen, let me just say justified. We have a little bit more to consider. Listen, do I support Roe v. Wade? Do I support abortion laws? I can tell you that it is more complicated than what I can discuss in this one Hope More session. But what I can say is that my preference is that, as believers, as a pro-life person, as a person who believes in the church, as having the moral authority in the community, my prayer is that we will be able to persuade women who find themselves in unwanted or crisis pregnancy to decide to have the child, to get prenatal care, have the child. and either raise the child or provide another loving home through adoption. That's my preference. That is my preference. So I am pro-life. Um, and let me tell you where things are question mark. And that's maybe why there are those who may be pro-life who vote or consider pro-choice, is that because fair minds disagree as to when life begins. You know, early 80s, it was like at conception. Now some people are saying 6 weeks. Now some people are saying 10 weeks. Um, if we don't agree on that, who is the best person to make the final decision? Is it the woman and her doctor? If we believe that abortion is wrong, period, then why would we support a bill that would even allow it at 6 weeks? Okay. So other questions that people have brought up is like, if a woman has a spontaneous abortion, which is a miscarriage, and naturally, that there are certain abortion drugs that would possibly be made illegal that would help her evacuate the womb of the child who's died naturally. Should we allow that? And then, of course, the idea that if Roe v. Wade is overturned or abortion is made illegal or made illegal after 6 or 10 weeks, that there will be women who will still have an abortion. That the question is not whether or not abortion should stay legal, it may be if abortion should stay safe. What do you do with that? I wish I knew all the answers to that, because I don't want to see women um, face other health craziness because they've gone in desperation to someone with unclean instruments and unclean environment to have an abortion. My mother always would share about being in the high school restroom and seeing a girl bleeding in the stalls from trying to abort a baby through a hanger. I don't want to see that world. I don't know what's going to come of Roe v. Wade, and I don't know what's going to come of the idea of states' rights or if abortion should be allowed at 6 weeks or 10 weeks. Is the abortion pill? There's some people who don't even take birth control pills because of, and I don't know if this is true or not, but there are beliefs that, say a woman forgets that one day and she takes two, that is ending a possible uh, fertilized egg. I don't know, but there are people who believe that so sincerely. That's why there's a people who believe that so sincerely. There's other people who don't believe in Plan Bs that supposedly interrupts conceiving or doesn't allow conception up to 72 hours or something after a person's had sex. There are people who don't believe in that. They think of that as abortion or abortion like. Even though supposedly scientifically it does not end contraceptive, well, it does not terminate or end the life of a fertilized egg, supposedly. But it's hard. It's hard it's hard it's a hard issue. But I don't want to see us become like Iceland. Iceland now has virtually like less than, 0 point something Down syndrome people, because people, it's routine that people get an abortion if their unborn is found positive with Down syndrome. I don't want a world like that. But what's interesting is that in Iceland, it's not unusual for there to still be some type of ceremony and recognition that it was ending a life. That Iceland refers more like as compassionate killing, like the viability of this person living as a Down syndrome person is worse or bad or so negative that it's compassionate to terminate their life. And I can't help but saying, at least admire and respect that they still see it as life. They're not calling it a clump of cells. So wherever you may land on the issue, I would love for people to be honest about if this is killing a human being. And then to me, the question would, is it justified? And I think for me, in many situations, it's not. And the truth of it is, I would not want to have to decide that for other people. So when I say not decide, I don't want to decide when the point of life is. So if someone aborts at 10 weeks, then okay, that's okay. But if they abort at 15 weeks, that's not. And maybe that's why we are where we are. So thank you so much for joining me for this Hope More show. I went much longer than I thought I would, but I guess it was pressing in me more than I thought it would be. I just want to again note that I pray that people are respectful and compassionate to people on both sides. I don't want to see clinics blown up, but I have a friend who she describes herself as an abortion survivor because her mother was stressed and young and was preparing to get an abortion, was sitting inside the abortion clinic. And there was, she describes it as an old Black woman who was singing like a gospel song as she was working. And the young girl started crying, or young woman started crying. And the lady said, "Baby, you don't have to do this. God is with you. You don't have to do this." And her mother, right before she was called in, or when they called her in, she said, "I can't do this," and walked out. This wasn't a protester outside. In fact, she sort of thinks it probably was an angel because she tried to find her again and couldn't. And she decided to raise her. Others may have give away for adoption, but I just think that's really powerful. And when the word says God knew you in the womb and anointed you in the womb, I just wonder what answers to worldwide problems or regional problems have been shortcut because they were terminated in the womb. That man's own decisions has caused the downfall. And just because people want to devalue something as not human doesn't mean that they're not human. And it doesn't have a consequence. When I think of words and thoughts like 13 million slaves, or some say 40 million slaves, may have, killed themselves. Wait a minute, I don't want to get that statistic wrong. Well, let me just say it like that. How many millions of slaves were killed in the Middle Passage? How many came? And for thousands of people, some may say millions across the Western society, felt that they weren't human, but that doesn't mean they weren't. And when I hear things like every 23 seconds a baby is aborted, that's millions of human people, persons, some of which may have died through miscarriage anyway, but that's millions that are not here. And I can't help but think just because I don't want it to be people, humans, it doesn't mean that they're not. And the idea that that can happen and there's no consequence in society, I think is unfortunately it's our ignorance of violence or our lack of wanting to take responsibility for it, but it does reflect an appetite of some sort when it comes to violence. I am Hope Dents, and thank you so much for your time. I love you and I mean it, and we'll see you next week. God bless you. Bye bye.